Good morning, good evening, and good night, my terrible listeners. You're tuned in to Terrible Sex with Naseem. I'm producer Dan, and each week I have the honor of bringing you registered nurse, aspiring sex educator, polyamory enthusiast, and true woman of the people, Naseem. She tells us stories, answers our questions, and helps us feel more comfortable around our world's infinite variety of sexuality. Send your questions, your comments, and especially voice memos to Naseem. The show's best when you get involved. All Naseem's contact info is on her website at terriblesexwithnaseem.com. How's it going, Naseem?
It's going good, Dan. Going real
Great.
good.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
What's going so good?
Well, I am coming into myself, and what I mean is I have a lot of insecurities in my life, lots of self-doubt. I think things that people can relate to.
Sure.
But over the course of the past week or two, I'm just letting a lot of shit go. And I'm becoming way more comfortable. My communication is better. I don't know, I'm feeling top notch.
Cool. Well, I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. My partner here recently,
Here, Chicago?
in Chicago, recently had a sexual adventure with someone recently who was not me. And at first I was like, I wasn't sure how I was going to respond to it, but because I am poly, of course, but that's to me, that's kind of like a signal of the de-escalation of our relationship. And I've been dreading that for a while.
Okay.
But I'm actually doing good. I feel very comfortable. I'm really excited for him. And I don't know. It's like a change in our relationship, and we're not breaking up or anything, but I don't know. Things feel really good, very comfortable. I'm pleased with how things are going.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
Feelings
Yeah.
are hard. Relationships are hard.
They are hard. I was actually trying to get us to have a threesome last night, but that didn't work out.
Well, my phone never rang.
I won't keep that in mind, but
Please don't.
Yeah, so that was kind of exciting. But it's funny, I'm talking about how I'm feeling less insecure. That's not entirely true though, because I was having a moment earlier today when my partner and I, we took a nap together, and then that turned into sex. And something I'm discovering is I don't really orgasm through vaginal sex. It doesn't, I don't want to say it doesn't do anything for me, but it's not the thing that's going to get me off.
Sure.
And I really need fingers. Fingering does it for me.
All right.
And that's, yeah. And I, for the longest
Jar
time,
with
was
the hands.
Jar with the hands. And I have been feeling so self-conscious about that lately.
Really?
Yeah, today, I did eventually have an orgasm, but
Congrats.
thank you very much. I did not do the work, and I felt a little self-conscious about it. I apologized. I'm like, hey, I'm sorry that you had to use your hands and not your dick. And he was like, what are you talking about?
I think
And that is some.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I think that's, and I don't know. We have this podcast, and part of it is talking. The reason why I'm doing this is so people can get more comfortable with their sexuality and the weird things that happen. And I realized, wow, there's a lot of stuff that I'm still not comfortable with.
Well, it's
And
nice to see some growth on the podcast.
Yeah.
Learning about yourself.
Yeah, and I wanted to share that just because, if you're feeling the way that you experience pleasure doesn't seem typical, that's not necessarily the case. And even if it isn't, like, so what? Who cares? Get off how you get off, you know,
Yeah.
within, safe and consensual guidelines. But yeah, so I'm just sort of having a moment of clarity, and that's kind of what's going on today.
Well, good.
Yeah.
Sounds like you're having a real nice day. Feeling some feelings, working some things out, having orgasms. And it's only 2 o'clock. Who knows what's going to happen this afternoon?
Anything could happen this afternoon.
Well, I have been framing walls in my basement and having a great time, getting real sweaty, making a mess, and
Sounds like
having
we have similar days.
right. I mean, that's how I get off. So you do your way, I'll do my way, and we'll all have a nice time.
Sounds good. Love to hear it, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so today, what I wanted to talk about before kind of delving into more recent activities is a little bit about the history of my experience with polyamory
Uh-huh.
and um, the first time that I had sex with someone who wasn't my husband
Ooh.
when while still being married to him. So,
I think that's a great topic.
yeah, it's going to be a little bit more like cerebral, I think, but I think it's something that maybe people can learn from or be interested in.
Totally.
And
It's not an
maybe
experience a lot of people have had.
no, and if you're thinking about opening yourself up and your relationship up in that way, I think there are some lessons that can be learned from my experience, and kind of things you may or may not expect. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Well, let's dive in.
Okay, so first off, polyamory was never really a consideration of mine in the past.
Okay.
Yeah, I have always considered myself a monogamous person. My husband and I have been monogamous for the majority of our relationship. Um, but prior to getting married, he actually said to me once, Naseem, if my dick stops working, you should fuck other guys because you deserve that. And I thought he was out of his mind.
Well, that's
Like,
sweet.
yeah, so he's a romantic. And so I, never really thought about it again and just put it aside. And then something happened mm, last 2021, right beginning of 2021. No, earlier than that. It was middle of 2020. And I started getting kind of interested in kink and BDSM.
Uh-huh.
And I was discovering this submissive side to myself and reading up on things that I thought may or not be interesting to me. Um, and I had discussed those things with Jar. And there were certain levels of play that he was comfortable with, but a vast majority of it he was not. Um, I, we talked about impact play in the last episode.
Mm-hmm.
He's not really keen on doing that sort of thing. And there were just certain boundaries that he did not want to cross, and of course I wasn't going to make him cross anything. And if he would have done something just to make me happy, that wouldn't have satisfied me because I wanted it to come from a place of sincerity, and I wanted it to be genuine. I wanted it to be something that he was going to enjoy as well.
You
And if he
wanted him to
wasn't,
genuinely want to smack you around.
yeah.
Yeah.
and he's not interested in that, which is fine. That doesn't have to be part of our relationship. So we had many conversations about this. And at one point, I remembered the thing that he told me prior to us getting married. Not to say that his dick was broken, that was not the issue, but there was something missing in my sexual experience. And there
Sure.
was something that I needed that I was not getting sexually. And I had a very open and honest conversation with him about it.
Was that
And
tough?
to
How long did you think about that? Like, was it just you thought about it in the morning, then that afternoon you're like, "Hey, Char, something's missing," or were you like struggling about having this conversation for a while? Because that's kind of a pretty big line in the sand in a new marriage, right?
it is a line in the sand. I mean, I don't know if you would consider it a new marriage. We had been married for 5 years at that point, um, together for 7 or 8. And I I don't know if there was actually like I wasn't like keeping time. The thing with my relationship with my husband is we have always been very strong communicators. We've always been the type of people to express things that we're thinking, things that we're feeling, wants, needs, that sort of thing. So it's probably been something that had been coming up periodically.
Uh-huh.
So I couldn't tell you, oh, I thought about it one day and then the next day I talked to him or I hemmed and hawed over it for months. It just sort of naturally happened, this conversation. At least that's how I remember it.
Right.
So we have this conversation and we together decide that it would be appropriate for me to seek out a play partner, to seek out someone who I could have this kind of exchange with. And so that's what I started doing. And that's all it was supposed to be. It was just supposed to satisfy this kink craving that I had and that I needed. And so I went online and I started going on apps. Like I didn't use Tinder back then. I was on FetLife, which I still dabble in periodically.
Uh-huh.
And that's where I actually got a lot of good and bad information. But I started becoming part of a community on FetLife, reading about different types of kinks and fetishes, um, and kind of learning and discovering what it was that I was interested in and things that I was not interested in. And learning about consent and learning about different types of boundaries and what makes a good dom, what doesn't, and things of that nature. Sort of just to educate myself because this can be a very dangerous thing to go in blind.
Absolutely.
So I really wanted to have some sort of toolkit before I met anybody. Now, did I do the best job at vetting or the best job at educating myself? No, I was on FetLife. It wasn't like I was reading literature or talking to people who were local or going to munches or anything like that. I was just on FetLife. There's credible people there, but there's also not credible people. But that was just my first foray into kink.
Yeah, dipping your toes in the water.
Sure, exactly. So then I got on an app called Field, which is like Tinder, but it's sort of directed more towards people of a certain predilection. So there's a lot of polyamorous people there. There's a lot of kink folks there. It's more of what I guess the mainstream would consider a deviant dating site, which I don't like that term.
Ooh.
Yeah, I don't like that term
That
because
sounds like a term my mom's mom would have used.
right, right.
Who turns out is my grandmother and was a absolutely wonderful and lovely woman.
Of course,
I'm not
but
downplaying my grandma.
no, but this is not probably the sort of thing that she or the sort of place that she would probably want her grandson perusing
And she would
necessarily.
be appalled by this podcast.
We will not air it to her.
She's, eh, I guess, I mean, well, she died long ago.
Oh,
So,
okay. Well, it's okay. My dad would not approve either, and he died a couple years ago. So
well, maybe they're listening together. Wouldn't that be a
maybe,
treat?
wouldn't it though? In any case, so I go on Field and I start talking to people, and I meet this guy who I like. Okay, yes, he seems like he knows a little bit about what he's doing. Um, We start talking. We have a great chemistry online. We're talking for about 2 weeks, and then we decide that we're going to meet. Now, I had been talking to Jar during this getting to know you period,
Hmm.
letting him know, hey, there's this person I've been talking to. And every step of the way, I was communicating with Jar because it was so important to me that he was 100% on board because I was so terrified of doing something outside the bounds of our agreed situation.
Yeah, and how's he dealing with it this whole time? Like, you're talking to other dudes. How's he acting when you're saying, "Hey, I met this guy on the internet"?
It's so funny because I was convinced that I was hurting him in some way.
Hmm.
But the way he responded to me every time I talked to him about dating and I check in with him, he is so cool as a cucumber and he is so fine with it. And he's so supportive and affirming. And he says things to me that always just surprise me because I'm expecting him to have some sort of negative reaction and he never does. He's really remarkable, I have to tell you.
Nice.
So, and I've told you some stories about him, and it just always blows me away. So we agree to meet. I go to meet this guy, and I am fucking terrified. Terrified for a number of reasons. I haven't dated in 7, 8 years. I don't know how online dating really works anymore. Um, I am meeting a strange man in a town that I'm not familiar with.
That was a whole different
Yes,
town.
yeah, I met him. It was like a 45-minute drive from my house, and it was at a bar I didn't know. And yeah, we were meeting in a public place, but you never know.
Right.
So I'm like, I send Jr. all the details of um, where the location of the bar is, what time. I'm sending this same information to my best friend, and just so like this is where I'll be. This
Right.
is what's going on. This is his name. So we meet up, we have some drinks, and initially I'm like, no, not really interested. But that's also how I start like every day is no, not interested.
Right.
But again, I have my 30-minute rule where 30 minutes to an hour in is kind of when I make my decision. And I found myself, I don't want to say forgetting that I was married, but I found myself not so worried about all of the concerns I had with having a husband.
Hmm.
And I still had my wedding ring on. It was one of those things where I'm like, should I take my ring off? Like, what do I, this is so new and awkward and weird. Like, do I take my ring off when I go to this date? And I'm like, no, I'm still fucking married. Jar's like not out of the picture just because I'm going on this date. Like, this is part of who I am. I'm keeping my goddamn ring on.
Nice.
Um, so I went on this date. We had a good time. And then at one point, I start flirting really hardcore, I feel. And he got the impression that, okay, he's going to invite me over to his house. So he's like, do you want to go? And I'm like, yeah, let's go. We go to the parking lot. He does some real slick move where he was smoking a cigarette. And I used to smoke cigarettes at that time. And I asked for a hit off of it. And before he's like puts the cigarette close to my mouth and then he like pulls it away and then like he kissed me. It was very smooth. It was
Uh,
dorky, but it was slick. So
it worked
we
for
go
you.
to it.
It worked for
It
you.
worked. It worked for me. Go to his house. We hang out on the couch. He pours me a glass of some very cheap bourbon, but I needed it. And talking turns into making out. And somehow I find myself, I was so afraid, but somehow I am the one who ends up making the first move in these situations. We start making out. Um, and he's like, let's move it to the bedroom. Or no, I asked him. Oh no, 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 no. I asked him like, you got a bed?
Hey, buddy.
where I was like, "Where's your bedroom?" So we go to the bedroom and he starts undressing me. And I still remember, even though I was there's all these emotions, right? I'm with a man who's not my husband. I haven't been with another man in over 7, 8 years. And when you're with someone for that long, consistently, you be- you become familiar with their body. You become able to anticipate what their moves are going to be,
Uh huh.
and it's very familiar. I was not familiar with this guy and didn't know what he was going to do next. Didn't know how he was going to touch, and I became so overwhelmed by this. Just the adrenaline, the fear, the excitement, the um, apprehension, trying to push back a little bit of the shame that, our culture has ingrained onto us about being non-monogamous. Like, am I being a cheater right now? That ran through my head. I'm like, no, this is agreed upon. This is okay. Jar said this is okay. And I just remember my body felt like it was on fire. I was like shaking, and I everything felt so sensitive, and it was exhilarating. And I felt a lot of guilt about that later, because I thought, does that like does that discount the sex that I've had with my husband over the past 8 years? Because that was so exciting to me. I'm like, and then it took me a while to process it. I'm like, no, that's not it. It's because it was so novel. It was this new, unique thing. That's what made me feel like it was the best sex ever. It probably wasn't. It just, in that moment, everything felt so heightened,
Right.
right? What's interesting though is, so there was some kink play involved and things that we had negotiated prior to this date, but really there was so little of that that actually happened that night. It was mostly just sex. Like, there was a little bit of like impact play. He did, as you like to say, smacked me around a little bit. One thing that I was not expecting at all, because we didn't talk about it, was he smacked me super hard, like on the pussy. And I was like, what the fuck is that? I loved it, but had no idea that people did that at that time. He also like spit started before like going down on me. Have you ever heard of this before?
I mean, like spit at you in your
Like,
pelvic region.
yeah.
I've seen
I
that happen in some adult shows.
never in my life I was like, what is happening? Like, there were so many things that were so new and I had never done before or had never been done to me before. And it was like this whole world opened up. And it was a great night. It was great. And I went home shaking. I remember I was driving my car and I was just shaking because holy shit, I did this thing.
Yeah.
I did it. Like, I did the thing. And I called my best friend up and I told her everything that happened. And she's polyamorous. And so she's also like, sometimes I think that she like listens to my stories and like looks at me and just like wants to pat me on the head, like, oh, that's cute kind of thing.
I know what that feels
because
like.
because she's experienced and I'm less so than she is in this kind of world, in this lifestyle. So I tell her everything that happened, and um, she's like, "Well, how do you feel? Like, do you feel any guilt? Are you excited? Like, what? How are you feeling?" And I had no guilt. I had no sense that I had done anything wrong because I didn't.
Right.
And that was a real turning point in how I viewed love. Not that I was in love with this guy, obviously, but my love for Jar, it changed how I viewed sex. It changed how I say this, and it may sound like hyperbole, but I truly mean that that changed my life and how I communicated and interacted with people going forward.
That's awesome.
And yeah, it was amazing. And I went home, and Jar had this at the time when we first started, because it was still very new to us. We had a don't ask, don't tell policy
Hmm.
of like, I'm not going to tell you anything you don't tell. It was very, he didn't want to know. He's like, I know that you did it, but I'm not going to ask about it. And so I didn't tell him. He's like, did you have a good time? And I said, yeah, I had a great time. He's like, awesome, super. And I had seen this guy a few other times. He eventually broke things off with me because I reminded him too much of his ex-wife, and that was like made him uncomfortable. So, so which was, fine, whatever. But later Jar had asked me, he's like, so did you have sex with him on the first date or the second date? And I'm like, yes. And he's like, okay, cool, cool, cool. But it was, and the reason I share this story, because it's not terrible sex, but it is definitely outside the scope of most people's relationships, or a lot of people's relationships. And it was a lot to grapple with. And I think people who are interested in polyamory, interested in non-monogamy, who are afraid of what could happen once you cross that line, because once you do it, you can't undo it. And that is a real fear. And I understand that fear. And I think it's a normal fear to have if it's something that's brand new to you, because it's uncharted territory, right?
Totally.
Um, so those are all normal feelings. Um, the most important thing is, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day about becoming poly, and he was so talking about, he's like, I hope that my partner can trust me. I just want my partner to trust me. And I'm like, you're getting this backwards. Yes, your partner should trust you to, do things safely, but you also have to trust your partner, your monogamous partner, because if they're telling you that it's okay and that they want this for you, you have to trust them at their word. You have to have a strong enough bond and relationship to trust that this monogamous person who you're with, or even if they're not monogamous, you have to trust that your partner is going to support you in these decisions and in these activities that you do.
Yeah, that sounds, I mean, like the most important thing of the whole deal.
Absolutely.
Now
Absolutely. It is super important.
now you said that, I don't know exactly how you said it, but you equate it to there being a line, and once you cross that line, you can't uncross it or you can't undo it. And I think that's totally correct, but I also think, you don't have to just jump into a date and fuck somebody.
No, but that's just my
Right.
that's
That
not
was
my
that was that
MO.
was
That's
your
how I
story,
do.
and it's worked out
That's
well,
my story.
and I'm glad it did, but you could have gone out on a date, stayed at a public bar, held some hands, and then told your husband about it to see how he felt about it. You could have made out in a
Exactly.
car, told him about it, see how he felt about it. There are things that you can progressively do if you're worried about not being able to undo something, and communicating about feelings and seeing how your partner feels about that as you move that direction.
That's probably the more healthy way to do things.
Well, and sometimes you just gotta, get pushed out of the nest and see where you land.
For sure, for sure. Especially though, because initially I was not looking for a relationship. The intention was finding a dom, having it be sexual in nature. And at that time, I didn't understand. Again, I was very new. I was only getting my information off of like FetLife and was still very
Hmm.
uneducated at this time. And I had believed that I had the false belief that, oh, it's just kink, it's just play, there will be no feelings. And that's
That's
sometimes the case, but that's not. If a dom is there to like take care of you and you hold all of this trust with that person, there is some level of relationship. It may not be romantic, but there in a in an ideal scenario, yes, there's pickup play. Yes, you can go to dungeons and like find a partner, a play partner in a moment. But if it's going to be a long lasting thing, there's some level of trust, of relationship, feelings of some variety that organically happen. And I didn't realize that at the time. So my search for kink and the sexual need had now transformed into a need for relationship that was different than the relationship I had with my husband.
interesting.
Hmm.
And you never could have known that without the progression that you went through.
I don't think I could have. I don't think I could have. I think if I had done what you suggest, which is a great suggestion, um, is if it was something that was progressive, I think that would have been a harder transition for me because I would have felt so much more anxiety about having romantic feelings for someone who wasn't Jar versus just jumping in the saddle and making it about sex first.
Okay.
Um, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. And I think, you know, it takes analysis of yourself, of your own feelings, communication with your partner, and then trying a thing and seeing how it feels and seeing, communicating about how it feels for everyone. That makes perfect
Right.
sense.
And I'm not gonna sit here and tell you that, oh, well, then that was easy from then on out. No. I never had to communicate with Jar about anything ever again, and everything was, home free. I could do whatever I wanted, and vice versa. Like, absolutely not.
It's not how any
Um,
relationship works.
no. And there is this idea that, your relationship with each partner is separate and that, you owe the person that you're with your time and your energy, and it's private from any other relationship. But the way that Jar and we have what some people would probably call a hierarchical relationship, hierarchical polyamory, which is kind of looked down upon in a lot of poly circles,
Oh, some
where
people
like
that
we
like
have.
open relationships don't like the way we organize our open relationship. Uh,
Because it's deemed as unfair to the other parties, right? And I can understand that. Like on an intellectual level, I get it. But it's what works for for me in my relationship, where I have what's quote a primary partner, and people hate that. People hate the term primary partner, and I understand it. I do. I get it why people don't like it. But we some people would say, well, you have a nesting partner, somebody you live with or you share finances with, and that's fine. He's my nesting partner, but he's also the most important person in my life.
yeah, I have no problems with the term primary partner. I think that makes
Yeah,
perfect sense to me.
sure. And I understand why it wouldn't for some people. Like people who are solo poly, like my friend, she has several partners, but she doesn't like nest with any single one of them.
Sure.
They're all separate. Um, they're all separate relationships, and that's great. That works for a lot of great people. And I said this before in previous podcasts. There's no right or wrong way of doing it, in my opinion. Um, but there can be some judgment for people who do choose to practice in the way that I do. Um,
Well, I'm judging the judgers, and I'm not happy about it.
it's okay. I've accepted it. I'm over it.
I don't
But
have to accept it.
um yeah, so that's sort of how we got here, was through kink and BDSM. And there's a lot of crossover. I find that a lot of people who are non-monogamous are also interested in that aspect of things. And vice versa. There's a lot of overlap, and shared community. So, but there's a variety. There's no one way of doing any of it. But that's my story. That's how I got here.
I like that story. I think it was great, and I thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. Thanks for listening, listener.
Hell yeah. So should we answer some questions?
Yes, let's answer some
Let's do it.
questions. I do want to say really quickly, though, kind of going back to the story, is that feeling of lack of guilt when on my drive home was also an indicator to me that this is the right style. This is the right lifestyle for me.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Not in a I'm an asshole, have no remorse kind of way, because I was always thinking about Jar's reaction and how he
Mhm.
was going to take all of this. But it wasn't about guilt. It was about making sure I was communicating. And yeah, so I'd say that was definitely the litmus test for me about whether or not this was going to work. And so far it has.
Well, good.
All right, now I'm ready for questions.
Whew. Hey, Naseem, how do I know what condom size and brand to get? I'm like 5.5 inches and like 4 around. Honestly, sex ed was non existent and my parents are Christian. What should I do?
Christians still have sex. They just don't talk about it. Um, so we have covered this kind of briefly in a previous episode, but um, so 5.5 inches is the average size. So that is good news because most condoms will fit you. Um, in terms of brand, though, your best bet is just to try a few out and see what you like. Even if you don't have a partner, go to Planned Parenthood. If you want to go on the cheap side, go to Planned Parenthood or a like health department. Get some free samples of different varieties. Try them on by yourself. Maybe masturbate with the condom on. See how it feels.
Yeah, a little
Um,
self party.
yeah, do you give yourself a self party. That's a good way of putting it. And see what you like. Try it with a partner if you have one. And see how they like it. If you both are into the same kind, that's the one you can stick with. If you've got a little bit of extra cash, maybe go buy a few different varieties that they may not have at the health department, and just test them out. But in terms of size, it sounds like you're gonna have no problem fitting your typical
Just
condom.
don't go out and buy jumbo like you're King Kong. You got a
Yeah,
perfect size dick, just buy a real good normal condom size.
manage your expectations.
That's right. And turn this thing into an adventure with your partner if you've got one. Say, "Hey, I got 5 different kinds we should try today."
And there's so many different types. Ones that have there's flavored condoms, there's condoms that glow in the dark, there's ribbed, of course, there's some that have like a hot and cold kind of situation going. There's a plethora of different varieties outside of your standard, you know, latex or sheepskin or whatever variety.
Man,
There's just so
they
much.
even got
There's
glow
so
in the
many
dark.
options. Mhm.
Hey, Naseem, what's the kink called for grabbing a face during sex? Usually done by an aggressive manner, and for the most part, a male doing it to a female. What's that called?
Is there a particular kink title for that? If there is, I am drawing a blank. Listeners, if you know the answer to this, please write in, because my initial thought was primal.
Ooh.
So primal is a type of I have a little bit of a primal kink, but primal kink is where you have this animalistic almost aggressive like need. So if you're the dominant, you're the primal dom. They You could call him a predator, but I don't like that term. And then like the partner would be the prey. So sometimes they'll go so far as like the prey partner will be like released into like the woods or something, and then the primal dom like goes and chases
Ooh,
them
bit of a
down, and then
manhunt.
like kind of a manhunt and hunts them down and like takes them down and they fuck in the woods, which I, whatever. But it can go anywhere. But you can have that extreme, but then you can also have just like
My favorite part of the image in my mind is the outfits that everybody has on for that chase in the woods.
they're fucking naked. I don't
Not
know.
not in my brain.
So I mean, they're not always naked, but or it could be something as like growling is considered part of primal play. There's there's a gamut. But in terms specifically about
We're
like
talking
grabbing
face
in the
grabbing here.
face grabbing, the kink of face grabbing, I might have to get back to you on this one because I don't know if there's an actual term for it. Um,
I think we just made that term. I think it's face grabbing.
face
I think we
grabbing.
should put up a Wikipedia page all about face grabbing, and then everybody will know it
Different
started right here from our terrible listeners.
different than face
Way
hugging.
different,
That's
way
a
different.
way
Yeah.
different.
This is done in an
So
aggressive manner, and
it's like that. I describe it as primal because it's that primal need to get close to your person.
just
It's like you got to have them
just
right
grab
fucking
them in the
now.
face and go,
Yeah,
"Ah!" That's face
yeah.
grabbing. That's what that
That's
is.
face.
"Hey, Naseem, I'm having trouble putting it in my girlfriend outside of when she does cowgirl. Any advice?"
So you can only get it in during cowgirl.
That's what I've gathered.
That's what I gathered. It's probably an anatomical thing. Like, there are certain positions that some people can't do based off of body type, a person's height. Like, I can't do doggy style. Like 99% of the time, I can't do doggy style
Really?
because of like because I got a big ass and I like my body like doesn't, and I'm like kind of inflexible, so like I can't, it just doesn't work a lot of the time. I've tried it so many times, and like my partner's like, my legs are too high up, or I just like my thighs are too long, or
My
something. I just
thighs
can't
are
get
too long.
no, because like when my knees are on the bed and I'm bent over, like they can't, like they're always like they're like go lower, and I'm like I can't go any lower, like I can't do it, like it's doggy style and I are not friends, and it makes me really sad because I fucking want it so bad.
Maybe
um
maybe, maybe you
except
gotta
for
get a little step stool for your partners.
maybe, or I mean, I'm not gonna say that I have never done it. It's happened. Like I've had threesomes with two guys, and
One guy
there was
laid on
high
the ground and
fiving.
the other stood on top of him, and then he had the right angle.
Like there were high fives because doggy style happened, but
Alright.
it's a challenge. It's not an easy thing. So going back to the question I had, it could be an anatomical issue. You may have to use like props, or and by that I mean like pillows, or there are certain like lifts or wedges or things that you can use to put a person's hip into a position that might be helpful. Um Test out a good one is if she's on her back, putting like a small pillow underneath the small of her back, kind of lifting her butt up a little bit, and then she can have an easier time lifting her legs like over your shoulders. You can try that. That's always a good one. Um yeah, I would just experiment with different positions using pillows. Um But if cowgirl's good for you and you're both enjoying it and getting off, like there's no if it's not broke, don't fix
Yeah,
it.
listen, the only thing I want to clarify with this question is, seems like they're asking about this for their own gratification. I'm having trouble putting it in my girlfriend outside of when she does cowgirl. So, does your girlfriend want you to put it in her in any other position outside of cowgirl? If that's
That's a good
if that's
question.
something that she wants to work on, then by all means, work on it together. Don't force anything. Try some lubricant. Move around. See what you could do with bodies and pillows and blankets and ropes and chains if you need them.
Are you fully erect
Right.
even?
Make sure your penis is doing its job when you need it to do it. But if your girlfriend just wants to do cowgirl and she's happy with cowgirl, I say let her ride and enjoy it if that's the only way she wants your penis in her.
And who doesn't like to see some boobs jiggling, like hopping up and down while she's riding you? I mean, that sounds like a great time.
Nothing wrong with that.
Next question, Dan.
Hey Naseem, so I'm a virgin and like I really want to fuck. And I'm talking to a girl in which I only and probably will always also like as a friend. And I was wondering, how should I bring up the subject that I'd want to be friends with benefits with her since, like, she's a good friend, but I also really want to fuck, you know?
I do know. I do know. So it's tough because you can definitely cross the line with a person who's not interested in you in that way, and there's always the danger of changing your relationship somehow, and this person may see you differently, and you don't want to change your relationship. Not to say that sex wouldn't change your relationship in some capacity, but it doesn't have to. But a lot of times it does. Um, so I think one way you can broach the subject is say, well, let me back up a little
Back it
bit.
up.
Do you just want to fuck or do you want to fuck her? And are you only choosing her because she's your friend and is like the, I don't know, easiest like target for lack of better expression? Like I'm curious there. Like you just want to have sex to have sex. Um so is this like a utility situation? You only want to be friends with her, but you want to have sex with her. I mean, there's some complicated things that can happen in this
Sure
scenario,
are.
um, with feelings. And remember, she's a person, not an
What?
object. I know,
I never
believe it or
never even
not.
thought of that.
People are people. um, so examine that. But if you have come to terms with all of that shit and you're like, no, you want to have sex with her and but keep it friendly, friends with benefits, which is fine. Um, you can ask her, have you ever thought about sex with benefits? Or sex with benefits. The benefit of being my friend. Have you ever thought about being a friend with benefit with somebody? You could just start flirting and see what happens. You could um, just be fucking honest, which is probably my go to. Would just be like, hey, listen, we're really good friends. I don't want to change that, but I'm also sexually attracted to you. And or, "Hey, you wanna just get this out of the way?" And we could be each other's first. I'm assuming she's also a virgin. We could be each other's first. It'd be a great story. We stay great friends. Let's try it. There's a lot of ways you can broach the subject. But again, I would just make sure that you wanna do this for the right reasons and that no one's gonna get hurt.
Man, I think that's good advice. And sometimes people still get hurt. Sometimes relationships
That's
get
true.
screwed up when you try to go from friends to friends with benefits. And that's part of the
Because
way the world works.
and I think a lot of that has to do with expectation. I think people like one person has one expectation of what's going to happen, and then another person has another expectation, or they have sex and then their what they thought they wanted changes.
Yep.
So, I mean, I have experience with that for sure. Whew. So, yeah, I think you just need to answer some questions for yourself first, and then just ask the question. Be honest about it.
Beauty.
You have time for one more?
Oh, we got time for one more. Hey, Naseem, do you think a vibrating dildo would make regular sex less enjoyable for me? I don't get off on just sex. I usually need clitoral stimulation. Do you think buying myself a vibrating dildo will make it so I never can get off with a regular sex if I end up loving it?
I'm shaking my head like
You sure
profusely.
are. Naseem seems to disagree with
Buy the fucking
that.
dildo. Buy the vibrator. Buy the vibrator. So here's the thing. Here's something that no one fucking tells you, okay? Only 20% of vagina havers can get off via vaginal intercourse alone, vaginal stimulation
I feel
alone.
like you need to time travel back 45 minutes, and now Naseem needs to tell that to 45 minutes ago, Naseem.
Like I said, things I know in my head versus things I know in like 20% of vagina havers can get off by vaginal stimulation alone. The vast majority of our pleasure comes from clitoral stimulation. It is our sex organ. The vagina is not. It's just a fucking canal. So, our sex organ is the clitoris. That's where the nerve endings are. So, of course, you're going to need stimulation there, and a vibrator is going to get you there more often and more consistently than any kind of vaginal penetration is. Now, if you're like me, because I am not in that 20% who gets off by vaginal stimulation, a little bit of both helps. Um, so is it going to like ruin you for a future partner? Fuck
Fuck
no.
no.
Especially if you use that vibrator with your partner. Then I can't even respond. Like there's like it's the best. Um yeah, it's not going to ruin you. There's like all these myths, and I think a lot of it, man, I'm going to get angry. There's a lot of these myths and this like idea that has been perpetuated by like men that um a vibrator or a dildo is going to like ruin women for it's going to like stretch you out, or it's going to like desensitize you to the male touch.
Man, I don't know what
Fucking
dipshit
bullshit.
men would ever s- think that a straight dude, that anybody would ever perpetuate that myth. It's the best to be in the presence of a beautiful woman who is orgasming and being a part of that process. What a wonderful place to be. And who gives a shit what tools you're using to get there?
Yeah, and I think that and maybe that was part of my problem earlier today is because all of that, history of bullshit that has been handed down to us by generations and the media and um, stigma that, oh, well, if my man can't get me off if I can't get off with just my man, there's something wrong with me? Like, what kind of bananas argument is that?
It's bananas.
It's
I'm framing walls in my basement right now. I'm using a nail gun instead of a hammer. It doesn't mean I didn't build that wall.
that's a great. Oh my god, Dan, that's amazing. Did you just come up with that right now?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Yeah. It's fuck, I don't need this podcast. This podcast is yours. That was amazing. Like I think that's a great
I just want to talk about home
I
improvement.
think that's a great analogy. You know? Um buy the fucking vibrator. Just buy it. Do it.
Also, get a nail gun.
Don't use it the same way. But get a vibrator. Enjoy yourself. Learn about your body. Um and it's not going to desensitize you. It's not going to ruin sex with, a real life human being in the future. If anything, it's going to teach you what you like, what you want, what you deserve, and help you communicate that to a future partner. And you can use it with them, by yourself. It doesn't matter. Get off. Buy the vibrator, get off, and enjoy your life.
Hear, hear. I don't think that we can finish any stronger than that, Naseem.
I don't think so. I'm worked up.
Yeah, you are. Woo, well, we'll call it a week. Let's do it next time.
Let's. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Naseem. Naseem wants all her terrible listeners to know that although she is a medical professional, she is not your medical professional. This podcast is not medical advice. If you want medical advice, please seek out your very own healthcare provider. Terrible Sex with Naseem is part of the Terrible Podcast Network.